As you know, Robin and I moved into our new home a couple of months ago now, and we're settling in, loving it, and I'm looking forward to actually getting into the garden this week and getting that feijoa tree finally planted. But moving house caused me to realize how much stuff the Dove family actually has. I don't consider myself a hoarder, but in the process of sorting and boxing and lifting and moving and unpacking and more lifting and more hours of handling, I had to come face to face with hundreds, actually thousands of items around our house. That led to a massive garage sale where we sold probably more stuff than most people own in their entire lifetime around the world. Sent 3 carloads of stuff to the Salvation Army, and we still had this packed truckload of stuff to take to our new home. But the real irony, of course, is that what happens when I see an advertisement promising something new and different, immediately I think, I need something more. I don't have enough, and I won't be satisfied until I have that new thing. And so I want to kind of unpack a question in front of us today that I've been wrestling with this week. Is it possible to be deeply satisfied without having everything you want? Now, I suspect that we know what the answer to that question should be. But I also suspect that many of us have lost our way in the actual practice of life. It's no secret, is it, that we live in this consumer-driven, debt-ridden, advertisement-saturated culture. And if we're honest, most of us would say that our spending differs very little with those who have no allegiance or loyalty to Jesus. And I can understand how that happens. I mean, the current we swim in is so strong against us, wanting to bring us downstream, to kind of pull us under. It's easier for us to give in to these material longings, be formed more by culture rather than being formed by Christ. But as we open God's Word around this topic of radical discipleship, we hear what God has to say, and we come face to face with the straightforward comments Jesus made, directed at this propensity we have to define our lives by what we have. Listen to what Jesus says. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. It isn't defined by what's in front of us in our garages. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You cannot serve both God and money. Apparently we have a choice. Which one will we serve? Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because greed comes in all sorts of different forms. I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. According to Jesus, the way I spend my money, the stuff I have in my garage, the stuff in my cupboards, has everything to do with this call to follow Jesus. Apparently life and lifestyle go together. If you want to experience the life of Jesus, you need to hear what Jesus has to say about lifestyle. You see, at GCC, we believe God's way is the very best way to live. So we want to hear what God has to say. So there's a book in God's Word, really spoken about, but wonderful book called Ecclesiastes. And the author Solomon refers to himself as Koheleth, meaning something like the quester. So here's the quester musing about, pondering about life. And one of the words he regularly uses to describe life and the pursuits that we go in is this Hebrew word chaval. Chaval, can you say it with me? Chaval. It has a guttural sound. And it's a hard word not just to pronounce, but a hard word to translate and define, because it has more of a picture behind it. The idea of vapor or breath even has a kind of idea in the sound, doesn't it? Chaval, it's kind of just there and then it's gone. It's fleeting. And when I think of chaval, I tend to think of bubbles. You get the bubbles out, and they look so wonderful. They glisten. They shine, and you want to, if I had kids here in the room, it would be the sense of, wanting to chase after them. They'd be out here immediately. In fact, some of you want to do that right now, but, you think you can't do that because, you're grown-ups now. But you want to. And in fact, you want to chase after them, just like, in fact, one of the phrases the quester uses throughout Ecclesiastes is this idea of chasing after the wind. chasing after the bubble, chasing after chaval. And that's what we do, isn't it? We just think, oh, wow, that I want to chase after it. It looks so glistening and so beautiful, and I want to grab hold of it. And as soon as you do, it just chaval. It's fleeting. It just pops. And this is what the quester wants us to realize. His whole goal in Ecclesiastes is that we would, excuse the pun, but pop the bubble that we have on life. This quest that we have to always want more. We won't be satisfied until we get this next thing. That's what he wants to do to us. He wants us to understand. This is going to be really hard to use now. There we go. That's what happens to these bubbles. So that we can kind of keep moving on in life and realize the picture that God has. You might remember, in fact, where are we? This is what he says about the subject of money and stuff. Those who love money will never have enough. How chaval to think that wealth brings true happiness. It's like the quester is singing that well-known song released 50 years ago by the Rolling Stones. Remember? I can't get no. And even 50 years after it's released, which kind of dates a whole lot of us, doesn't it? Little has changed in our world. Still materialistic. We're dissatisfied with what's right in front of us. And this dissatisfaction keeps us from enjoying what we have. We're always looking for the next bubble. It's the one with more kind of glistening and one that will capture our imaginations, or one that's just bigger and bigger and bigger. We just can't enjoy what we have. It's interesting, though, because I've never met anybody that says they love money, like the quester says. But I've met lots of people who I think do love money. Because it's hard to see in ourselves, isn't it? So I wrote down this week, how would I know if I'm a lover of money? These are some things I jotted down. When I find my thoughts are returning again and again to something I'm hoping to buy, I'm in love with money and its power to get me what I think I want. When I make decisions that are spiritually unwise for myself and my family, I'm in love with my money and my plan for getting more of it. When I find myself wishing I had something that someone else has, I'm in love with money and with the status or convenience or pleasure it seems to promise. When I spend more time complaining about what I do not have than rejoicing in what I do have, I'm in love with money. And I depend on my possessions rather than God to give us contentment and joy. See, the problem with loving money is that we never have enough. We don't get no satisfaction. The return is not high enough. The financial cushion is not big enough. We're not satisfied ever with what we have. And at the heart of consumerism, I think, is more than just a desire for more. I think it's also a desire for next. What's the next big thing for us? We might be satisfied for a day, for a week, for a moment. We experience satisfaction in that moment, but then we hear of something new and we're no longer satisfied with what's in front of us. So you buy the iPhone 7 and then you find there's iPhone 8 or the iPhone 8S, and each time the new model comes out, you suddenly look at what you have and you're dissatisfied. Even though you had once really wanted it, but now it's not so good anymore. Or you just finish a holiday and you get back and then you're dreaming about what's next. Or we need to check out the latest, newish restaurant before everyone else does, because that's what's next. Or the next trend, and we want to be there right at the beginning. And we think we will finally be satisfied when we get to next, and that we can't be satisfied if we miss out on what's next. Robin and I use a phrase around our house to our kids almost every day. You can't always have what you want. You can't always have what you want. The problem is it's not just the kids who need to hear that. It's me and it's you. Because the question gives some reasons why we can't be satisfied with what we have if we're a lover of money. This is what he says, some of his reasons. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? It's this downside, isn't it, to prosperity? That you have to spend more and more money to make more and more money and to protect what you already have. The bigger your business, more assets you have, the more staff you need to hire. You build bigger plants, you pay expensive lawyer fees and accountancy fees, you buy sophisticated security systems, sure you have good life insurance cover. And he sits back and he goes, what's the point? You're so busy protecting it all and securing what you're not even enjoying because you're so busy trying to get what's next. It's hell. It's fleeting, this bubble we're pursuing, and then it's just empty. He goes on. People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much, but the rich seldom get a good night's sleep. It's always the anxiety, the worry of losing the next deal or losing what you already have. Can't be satisfied. There's another serious problem, he says, I've seen under the sun. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as the day we were born. Can't take our riches with us, and this too is a very serious problem. People leave this world no better off when they came. All their hard work is for nothing, like working for the wind. Throughout their lives, they live under a cloud, frustrated, discouraged, and angry. Aren't you glad you came to hear those cheerful words today? But God has given us his word for a reason. Because God knows we have a problem. And our problem is that we're always on the lookout for what's next. And we believe that we're not going to be satisfied until we have that thing, that experience that we're looking for. The truth is that this isn't new information for us, is it? And most of your friends, neighbors, colleagues, they would all agree with probably everything I've said so far. But here's the thing. If you surveyed your neighbors, your colleagues, friends about whether we're becoming too materialistic as a country, you'd probably get a yes. Pastor John Ortberg tells of a survey about materialism done in the USA. He said 89% of Americans who were polled said the United States is too materialistic. I'd imagine the figures in New Zealand would be the same, but guess what? By sheer coincidence, almost exactly the same percentage said they wanted more themselves. So in other words, nobody wants to be materialistic. It's just we all want more. I mean, that's the irony, isn't it, of the whole thing. And it's true for all of us in this room and everybody listening to this online. This is why God's word calls us to fight this love for more, this need for next with contentment. Love the way the Apostle Paul sums it up this way. True godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. What a statement to make. True godliness with contentment is itself great wealth, riches. I mean, just get your head around that. Because if we actually believe this, we don't need to imagine some other bigger bubble out there somewhere. We can actually realize we have great wealth right now. If we can actually believe what God has to say here, we can be deeply satisfied without the next thing. Dr. Ronnie Janoff-Bullman and her colleagues compared 22 winners of major lotteries to 22 average people, the subjects, and also to 29 people, victims of paralysis. Over time, the lottery winners reverted back to their pre-lottery levels of happiness or depression, and in fact, wound up no happier than the 22 control subjects, about the same. They even lost much of their ability to extract joy from small pleasures. Now, we've probably all heard studies like this one before. The part that interested me was the comparison with the victims of sudden paralysis. The paralysis victims, those who had lost some sudden movement in their body, were not nearly as unhappy as might be expected. Once they got over the shock of their misfortune, they were actually more capable of experiencing joy from even the smallest of pleasures compared to the lottery winners. It's hard to believe they were actually more optimistic about their prospects for future happiness than the lottery winners. And I think that's because the victims of paralysis had learned what we're talking about today. They learned contentment. And contentment is one of those marks of radical disciples. Well, you might say, well, maybe contentment is just one of those things some people are born with, like a great singing voice, but you missed out. But listen to what Paul says in the book of Philippians. I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstance. In any and every situation, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I have learned. In other words, this is like learning a foreign language. It might be really hard, but it's possible to learn it. But it's different in that he goes on and says, this strength, this ability to be content comes from God. Can't do it yourself. Philip Yancey, writes of a spiritual seeker who interrupted his busy, acquisitive life to spend a few days in a monastery. And a monk came along one day. I love this. He says, I hope your stay is a blessed one. If you need anything, let us know, and we'll teach you how to live without it. I really like that, because contentment is not based on circumstances. It's something learnt and very possible to live a life of deep satisfaction while not having everything you want. So how do we develop? Oh, yikes, there we go. Can't always have lights either, apparently. So how do we develop and learn contentment? Now, what would the curriculum be for the School of Contentment? Let me mention a few ideas to you along with some concrete practical help. Number one, be thankful and enjoy what you have. It's easy to think that our response to a message like this should be to, feel guilty with what's in our cupboards, garage, car park. That's not what the quester says. Listen to what he goes on and communicates to us. After looking at the way things are on this earth, here's what I've decided is the best way to live. Take care of yourself, have a good time, and make the most of whatever job you have for as long as God gives you your life. And that's about it. That's the human lot. Yes, we should make the most of what God gives, both the bounty and the capacity to enjoy it, accepting what's given and delighting in the work. It's God's gift. God deals out joy in the present, the now. So in other words, enjoy a lovely steak dinner tonight, a bottle of Chardonnay or sparkling grape juice. Enjoy the opportunities in your job. We're not meant to respond by feeling guilty, but this is a gift from God. So I want to give you some homework this week, which I know you'll be thrilled about, but I think this helps. I want you to make a list of everything God has given to you. Now, it might be that you need to keep adding to this list throughout the week, because I'd imagine it's going to be a long list. Like, do you have access to a public park, a library? Is there a friend you can call where you're deeply distressed? Write it down on your list. Mention friends by name as well as beloved family members. List the abilities you possess without overlooking those magnificent gifts like literacy and health and eyesight, the ability to work. Include meals. Be specific about what's in your fridge. Think about transportation you have access to, trains, bus, maybe your own car, that you're likely to eat tomorrow, the next day. Include that on your list. Write out spiritual blessings. My guess is it's going to take a wee while. And then once you've completed it, I want you to read back through the list. Share it with somebody in your small group, or get together with a friend over coffee and share your list. You might even want to host a big Thanksgiving party just to invite people around and show them, hey, this is all that God has given to me, and I'm so thankful to God. Big Thanksgiving party, because I want to thank God for what I have right now. There's a second activity in the School of Contentment. Not just thanking and enjoying God for what we have, but number two, stop comparing. Because here's the irony. If I got you to write down that list right now, once you're finished, the temptation would be to what? To glance across your shoulder and look at somebody else's list and wish that you had something on their list. And this might even happen in your small group this week when you hear somebody else's list. Howard Coffin says, envy is the art of counting the other fellow's blessings instead of your own. But comparing lists destroys contentment. Of course, the irony is that every single person in this room would be the envy of over half the world right now. Can you hear me now? Really easy to compare, isn't it? You know, you have a car, but you might want a Mercedes. And then, you might even, but even though the world's population, most of the world's population doesn't have a car. Or you might actually have a Mercedes, but then you want a sports version, or you want the latest model of Mercedes. This just goes on and on, isn't it? This comparing lists leads to discontentment for what you already have. And that's why you and I need to go back to the list that we have and praise God for what God has already given to us. There's a third activity when it comes to learning contentment from the school of contentment. Number 3, count the cost to be content. Because there is a cost to contentment. You know, so far in this message, you might give a nod to go, yeah, I want to be a content person. I want to be a generous person. But you actually need to understand that there's a cost associated with what I'm talking about. In his book entitled Satisfied, Jeff Mannion has people imagine 2 families with similar incomes. The first family, let's just assume both families have a combined income of $100,000. That might seem way over the top to you, or it might be inadequate to you, but let's just, take that figure for maths purposes only, so much easier. The family, let's say on your left, let's call them the Smiths, have devoted themselves to a generation-old financial practice called the 80-10-10 discipline. Spending habits, not their invention, is what they've heard at their church. The discipline of restricting their spending to 80% of their earnings, saving 10% of their income, and giving 10% to their church. Sticking to this discipline plan, the Smiths will spend $80,000 this year. Now let's say the neighbors to your right have not practiced this absurd discipline. Instead, the Wilsons, as we'll call them, are, normal. They too earn the same combined income of $100,000, but routinely overspend what they're making. They annually spend $105,000. So their expenses, clothing, cards, dining out, holidays, outdistance their earning by $5,000 a year. So here's the maths problem to think about. What's the earning gap between the Smiths and the Wilsons? Well, no gap, both identical incomes. But what's the spending gap between the 2 families? Well, it's $25,000 between the Smiths and the Wilsons. And this is going to show up in some very observable ways and practices. And Christmases, and presents, and ski trips, and restaurants, and types of clothing, and newer cars, and newer iToys. By saying yes to $25,000 of stuff that the Smiths have said no to, the Wilsons are much better off in stuff and enjoying a whole lot of experiences that the Smiths are missing out on. So what happens when the Smiths kind of peer over the neighbor's fence? How do they feel? Well, they feel poor. They feel kind of envious because, they feel like they're missing out. What's wrong with us? Why can't we go on that trip? Why can't we do what they do? And this is exactly the cost of contentment. If we're going to be content, we need to mentally concede to the Wilsons, okay, you win. We're not even playing the same game as you. We're not going to give in to that kind of temptation. You see, the pursuit of a satisfied, generous life has to be battered out in the midst of a consumer-driven, debt-saturated culture. Don't think it's simple to make this decision of pulling away from a culture of consumption, because around us are real people buying real things that we love and that we would love to experience. But here at GCC, we believe that God's way is the very best way to live. And that includes generosity, and it includes contentment. So therefore, we choose to follow Jesus in generosity and contentment. There's a 4th practice at the school of contentment. Simplify your lifestyle. Embedded in the book of Proverbs, we find this prayer attributed to a man named Agur. And he asks God to grant him 2 wishes before he passes from this life. Effectively, he's putting out a bucket list to God. Imagine what he's going to put on it. Imagine what you would place on it. This is what he writes. Oh God, I beg 2 favors from you. Let me have them before I die. First, help me never to tell a lie. Second, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. So request number 1 on his bucket list is honesty. Lord, I deeply long to live a life of integrity. Please guide my steps in such a way that I may not leave a trail of lies or a maze of deception. Then he presents number 2, simplicity. Lord, give me just enough to satisfy my needs. Not, dirt poor, nor filthy rich. He just asks for his daily provisions to be met. And it might sound strange, but he goes on and explains why. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, who is the Lord? And if I'm too poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name. He knows God's heart and he knows his own heart, and he suspects that if he has this life of abundance, it might lead to some kind of spiritual drift where he just kind of thinks he's a self-made man. Might disown God. Or he might be in this severe shortage and he'll become a thief. And what he desires deeply in his life is to love God deeply. Wealth is secondary. This is a prayer for simplicity, a prayer I think every one of us need to be praying. There are studies out there, you can Google them, that show how consumptive lifestyles harm the lives of people all over the world. See, what we spend and how we spend it has a negative impact on millions of lives. 800 million people are destitute. 10,000 people die of starvation-related aspects every single day. So for the sake of the gospel, it's good for us to develop a simpler lifestyle, to learn to manage on less and to give more away. See, most of us realize how rich we are in comparison to the larger world. And the tragedy is not how much we have, actually, but how much we think we don't have and how much we expect and how much we demand. So that's why I want you to write your list. All the things God has already given to you to remind you that you don't need another single thing to be rich. See, if we can't learn to be content with what we have, we will never be satisfied, even if what we have is doubled or tripled. Only more of Christ does that. See, as Jesus said, your life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. You are not what you have. You are not where you live. You are not what you wear. You are not what you drive. And if you're not any of these things, who are you? Well, you're who God says you are. You're his child. You're an heir with Jesus, incredibly loved and blessed. So what I'm proposing is that someday this week, you'll have what I call an enough day. This is a day where we will declare that we will no longer compete with the Wilsons. We're just going to say they win. We're not going to have any purchases at all, just contentment with what you have, a satisfaction with what you have right in front of you. On this day, I want to encourage you to have a little chant. I was going to get you to chant enough, but we're Kiwis, so we tend to be more on the understated side. So I think I'll get us to chant, it could be worse. Can you say that with me? It could be worse. So when you get home and you're tempted to think that you would be more content if you had a nicer, newer, more expensive home, when you walk into your house, I want you to chant a bit louder, bit of passion. When you get to your car and you see the scratch on a side, I want you to chant. When you step into your office or university or job and dream of a change in circumstances, I want you to chant. If you're married, you might be tempted to think that a nicer, newer spouse might exist, but instead I want you to wake up tomorrow morning and look your spouse right in the eyes with much passion and say, no, I don't encourage you to do that one. But this is where we learn contentment, isn't it? Because the school of contentment teaches us to be thankful and enjoy what you have, to stop comparing lists, to count the cost to be content, to simplify your lifestyle. One more thing I want to share from this school of contentment. Be generous and share. Did you know that the giving actually makes you feel healthier and happier? Psychologist Henry Cloud says that our brains are actually wired to feel good when we give. So if you want to have like generous friends around you, look for somebody happy here this morning and make them your new best friend. When my son Chase was just 3 years old, he had his hand stuck in this vase. And I remember him howling away. And I started to pull his hand out, but there was no way that hand was coming out. And then I noticed that he seemed to have his hand in a fist. And I told him, we just release your hand, and make it relax, and we'll be able to get your hand out. But he said no, because he had some marbles in his hand, and he didn't want to release them. Now, I thought this was only true of monkeys, but apparently this was true of my son. He didn't realize that, he just needed to let it go, but he was trapped. He just couldn't let it go. And until he released his hold, his hand couldn't go free. Isn't that a picture of you and me? We just can't let our stuff go, and as a result, we get stuck in life. And I think this is one of the reasons God tells us to be generous, because when we give, our souls are able to release the hold that money so has in our lives, as well as resourcing mission and ministry in churches. So my encouragement to you is that you would, set up an AP or expand that as a way of helping your own soul release the hold that materialism has on us. Or it might be giving something away that you haven't used. Those crystal glasses you got for your wedding many, many, many years ago, but you've never actually used. Give them to someone that can actually enjoy them. Or the tent that's in your garage, again, that you never go camping anymore, give it to a family who could go camping and enjoy it. And as you do so, you will experience the joy of being generous and of sharing. For several minutes, Wendy stands peering into her walk-in closet. It's full, packed, every hanger used, every shelf occupied. As she scans her stockpile of clothing, she mutters those infamous words, "I don't have anything to wear." And then it hits her. Every item in this wardrobe was liked at some point, at least when it was purchased. Liked enough to try it on in a fitting room, to carry it to the checkout, exchange money for it. Strikes her as mildly humorous that she loves everything she buys but little she owns. Then in one of those contemplative moments, she asks the question, why do I shop when I'm lonely, bored, or depressed? It's getting close to the big question she needs to ask. What if the empty space you're trying to fill is in your wardrobe? See, many of the things we buy because of the promo, the empty promise. Buy me, and I will complete you. But it's all chaval. It's this glittering bubble that's got no substance. It's empty. Church, we need to know that our worth is fixed on something solid. Like Jesus said, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. To be satisfied in Jesus. Because it is entirely possible to be deeply satisfied without having everything I want, because Jesus is more than enough for me. In a relationship with Him, I have everything I need. And so when the advertising whispers, buy me and I will make you whole, you can confidently shout back, Jesus is more than enough for me. Let's talk to Jesus. Jesus, thank you that you are way more than enough for us. We want to continue to drink from the well, offering us life in its abundance. We want to drink from your well and not the well in all the literature and promo and advertising in the world around us. That promises so much, but it's just empty bubbles. Forgive us for the way we love money and love our stuff more than we love you at times. We want to love you deeply, Jesus. to grow in our love and affection for you, so that nothing is more important to us than you. You know, might be here that you might be here this morning and you don't yet know Jesus. And perhaps in the message, there's just been the sense of chasing after all these other things, but they just continually come up empty, 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 empty. Today, Jesus just invites you to come to Him and talk to Him and find life in His abundance. Or perhaps you're here and just the message, and I hope this is true for all of us, message is going, oh, Jesus, I'm relying so much on my stuff to define me. I don't want to be defined by that. I want to be defined by being your child, to be loved by you. Just talk to Jesus. Find life today as you talk to Him. And so, Jesus, we ask that you would be what we seek after. You would be our pursuit. We want to follow after you, Jesus. We want you to be our vision for life. Just you, because you are more than enough for me. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.